this one I want to talk about marriage in the New Testament. And so hope it's going well where you're at. Hope you're healthy. And hopefully you're getting a lot done on this Sabbath day, rest and learning. Well, as was mentioned, as you know, Pam and I don't like to draw a lot of attention to our anniversary. Normally it doesn't even come up. It came up this morning because I just happened to mention to a few of my friends around the country that we celebrated our 44th yesterday, and you know, we don't normally have it to do, we don't want it to do. We appreciate your kind words and your prayers and your thoughts. But I mentioned it because marriage was on my mind, and I really greatly appreciate my marriage to Pam, 44 years. You know, Kevin McMillan wrote that she should be giving this sermon because she got the worst of the deal. So, and he, you know, I appreciated your note, Kevin, appreciated your thoughts. She's a fine gal. I really don't want to talk too much about us today for a couple of reasons. You know, there's a lot of times if you talk about yourself, it just sets up people to try to knock you down. Or, even worse, sometimes people go through life, they don't have a good situation in their family. So a lot of times we don't like to talk about how good our family life is, and I don't like to talk about how much I love my wife and my boys and my grandkids. As much as some of you would like to hear those things because it's a personal touch, I always feel badly about people who are going through tough times. I know I played a song at church a decade ago about Let Kids Be Kids. It's a real good kid song. It was really, most people loved it. They loved the song. But one lady, a friend of mine, came up afterwards and she said she hated that song. And she told me because I knew what was going on in her life, that song did not motivate her, did not inspire her. It just pointed out some of the bad parts of her life. So I understood that, and I apologized to her. By the way, later on, when she got married, she played that song at her wedding, so everything turned out okay, which just meant her life got better. But so when I talk about family, when I talk about marriage, I'm no way trying to remind you of situations that you're going through that are tough. We all have our challenges, we all have our crosses to bear. But I at least want to mention how much I appreciate Pam and how much I appreciate the commitment she and I have been able to have for 44 years. And we're looking for longer years, and we go through the different challenges of life. The challenge now is taking care of her parents. That just wears us out physically. I mean, there's no challenge spiritually, no challenge emotionally in our relationship. It just wears us down physically. But we're working together at that. We want to continue working together on that. We have a few young people here today, but we don't have nearly as many young people as we used to have. In some ways, the words I would give today in the study and in the sermon could be valuable to them, planting good seeds. So I'm glad they're here with us today, but I'm looking at it, the value of this presentation could be for the rest of you. Maybe what I say today might be helpful for you as you deal with people. As you talk about marriage, as you reflect about marriage to people, hopefully the words I give today would be beneficial and helpful to you. I'd like to begin with two scriptures, one over in Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. You know, I'm not claiming to have all the answers in this presentation. I want to give you some thoughts to think about. And as you think about these thoughts, hopefully they can be helpful to you and, like I said, helpful to other people. God will open the door for you to help people. And of course, we've been married 44 years, but some people have been married much longer. You know, my in-laws have been married 68 years. So that's a long time. And as long as they continue to do well physically, that marriage will continue to go for as many years as God will allow them to be together. So we're always happy to see the different marriages, even in the congregation. Many of you have been married a long time. You know, in Branson, they like to tell jokes, and I love going to Branson. You know, they always ask in the presentation, they go, what's the secret for a long marriage? And they have people raise their hand, and their answer is living a long time. So their answer is, if you've been married a long time, it means you're old. That's what that means. But Genesis 2, verse 24, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. The goal in a marriage is to become one flesh, whether that be physically, emotionally and spiritually. The more we can be one flesh, the better. The more we can melt together. The challenge in marriage, and we were having this discussion in the interactive Bible study, part of what I do as someone who does weddings and someone who does pre-marriage counseling, the challenge we have is too many times young people come for marriage counseling late in the game. I know a couple of the churches of God have rules that I think are good principles. I just wish they weren't rules. I wish we would do these on our own. In other words, some churches have a rule that says you cannot get engaged in that church until you do pre-marriage counseling. Well, I think that's a good principle. I hate to have rules like that you have to tell people smoking's bad for your health, or don't drink too much. I hate to have spell out the obvious, but most people when they come for pre-marriage counseling, to me or to you, are well on the road to emotional attachment. And that makes it tough. Makes it very tough because while we're not accountable for their decisions, we are accountable for how we influence each other. And so when a young couple comes to me, I take it as a responsibility that I've got to be the best influence I can be on them as they proceed in their marriage. But that's not just me, folks, that's all of you. And that's what I hope this material today will be some help to you to be a positive influence on people in a marriage. So you want to help understand the concept of one flesh, the sharing that goes on, the combining that goes on, the giving, the loving that goes on. And of course, that's what when you contemplate that, you have people hopefully find common goals, hopefully have the common goal of mature people having the Spirit of God, having common commitment. And to me, the most important thing in any relationship is trust. To me, it's the most important in any relation. In fact, through the years, if you understand what Jesus had to go through, Jesus could not trust his disciples because they were human and they fell short. And you know that in your life, some of the saddest days of your life is when people you trusted, you came to the point you could no longer trust them. I'm just saying that's a reality. So what we want to do, we want to hopefully have it. You want to marry someone you can trust, and of course you're young, so you're just building up baby steps of trust, but you want to get to a point through the years you grow in trust, and hopefully that trust will not be broken. Having said that, I realize some people hearing this message have gotten to the place where they can't trust their spouse, and I feel badly for that. I pray about that. Sometimes we try to help in counseling to help people do better on that, but you want to help people build on trust. I will say one thing I did right a long time ago. I was a student at Ambassador College over here. My wife was 1 year ahead of me. She graduated a year ahead of me, so she was out working for my senior year. She's actually 2 years older than me, but she's 1 grade ahead of me. Actually, she wanted me, I joke, it took my mother-in-law to convince her to love me. Because she was 2 years older than me, she at first wasn't considering me in that way. She was considering me to marry her younger sister, who's 1 year younger than me. And so she was talking to my mother, who became my mother-in-law. She said, "Oh, Dave needs to be with Carolyn. Carolyn needs to be with Dave. Carolyn." And finally her mother said, "I think you like Dave." So it took my mother-in-law to convince my wife that she loved me. But I'm glad she did. And but again, finally I realized, yeah, I do kind of like him. I do kind of respect him and all these different things. So one good thing I did when I was a senior at the college over there, I had worked in the Worldwide News for a long time, and then finally I, for a while, worked for Ronald Dart, who was the chancellor of the college. He asked me to ghostwrite for him, and mostly letters and things. So that's what many things I've gained from Ambassador College. That place taught me how to speak. That place taught me how to write, and that place gave me I met my wife. Those are the big things I gained from Ambassador College. I mean, the Bible course and anything else I could have gotten at other places. But the skill of speaking and writing and meeting my wife. So I was working for Ronald Dart, writing for him. And I said, "Mr. Dart," there was a senior trip to Mexico City. I said, "Mr. Dart, can I skip the senior trip? Can I go spend a week with my wife out there in West Texas with her parents? I'd like to get to know my future in-laws better." And he said, sure. I'm glad he said yes. I know my friend said, oh, you're going to regret never going on your senior trip. You're going to regret not going with your buddies and your friends. But I got to spend a whole week out in West Texas getting to know, I knew it was, I had already known Pam. I wanted to get to know my in-laws. And I never regretted that a day in my life. Again, this was someone that I trusted, someone I could build a relationship with, and with the grace of God has continued on. But to be one flesh, when you trust someone, if you're having trust issues with your spouse, obviously you talk to God about it, you talk to some people who can help you along with it. But if you're trying to help people who are looking to get into a relationship, if you're trying to help these people you love or people who come to you, help them find someone they can trust, admirable traits, because they're going to be one flesh with that person, combined together in all your goals and all your good points and your bad points. I want to turn over to Deuteronomy chapter 21. This is an odd thing to put in this sermon, but I chose to do so. I'm going to give you a piece of advice that many of you will agree with, not all of you will. And I give you this advice if you're helping somebody else. We talked about helping young people who are getting married for the first time, who are young. I'm going to give you a piece of advice about if you're helping someone who's going into a second or third marriage. I recommend a prenup. I recommend that you encourage them to have a prenup. Now, the thing about a prenup is years ago when this was talked about, when it was first introduced to me, my reaction was a prenup. Why do Christians need a prenup? Prenup's a written agreement, a legal agreement, how to divide assets, how to share assets in the future, whatever happens in the future. And of course, my thought was, why would two people in the Church of God have to have a prenup? This was my thinking decades ago. Then it hits me, and not only through the Bible, but through experience. In fact, I was talking to one lady one time, and I was talking to them about a prenup. They're still married, but I said, I think people in the second marriage should get a prenup. And she goes, why? And I said, let's say you pass away and your husband remarries, and he spends all the inheritance that's supposed to go to your kids, he spends it on the new family. Of course, I said it to make a point to her. She goes, oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Because what happens is, unfortunately, there are real-life situations, folks, people who are religious people who, when money gets involved, they take advantage and they do bad things. They do horrible things. This is the example here in Deuteronomy 21, verses 15 through 17, is about the inheritance rights. And it's not talking specifically about a prenup, but hopefully you'll see the parallel. Deuteronomy 21:15. If a man has two wives, one loved and the other unloved, and they have borne him children, both the loved and the unloved, and if the firstborn son is of her who is unloved, then it shall be on the day that he bequeaths his possessions to his sons, that he must not bestow firstborn status on the son of the loved wife in preference to the son of the unloved, who is truly the firstborn. But he shall acknowledge the son of the unloved wife as the firstborn by giving him a double portion of all that he has, for he is the beginning of the strength, and the right of the firstborn is his. And I've just seen situations where, unfortunately, a man or a woman gets remarried. Instead of protecting the assets for the previous children, the previous family, sometimes it ends up that bad things happen and they get deprived of their firstborn rights. And so I just think that as a precaution, I think it's a good thing to do. It's just a matter of wisdom and common sense. I would recommend you consider it. And if you're talking to people, if someone in the second or third marriage, I recommend a prenup to protect the assets of the children who came prior. If you get into second marriage, you need to take care of and make a commitment to the second spouse, for sure. And some of that would be to the family of the second spouse. But you don't do so at the expense of the first marriage. And you say, well, I don't have to worry about that. I think you should consider doing that. Now I want to give you a couple quick reminders from the New Testament. The question could come up is acceptable reasons for divorce. We in the church, we teach you preach the rule and you counsel the exception. That's why when we're up here preaching, We preach the rule, what God intends, but then you counsel the exception. In other words, marriage is meant, according to all the written reports, is meant for life. And every goal should be that the marriage should be for life. But there come situations where there's a time for divorce. And we know that in the Old Testament, God got divorced from Israel and Judah. We know he got divorced, so thereby we know that it can happen to anyone. Divorce can happen. Now, of course, the issue is not the divorce. The issue is, can a person remarry? That's the thing. But so if God got a, if please don't be of the mindset that says, if you get a divorce, there's something wrong with you. Really? You're going to say that about God? That there's something wrong with God? No, come on. Don't say things like that. Divorce is rough because it's bad on the people who go through it. And God hates divorce. I would say he even hated his own divorce. But there was a time he got divorced, so obviously he had a justifiable reason. I would hope that you understand the Bible talks about in Matthew 5 and Matthew 19 that the main reason for divorce is sexual impropriety. Sometimes it's called different words, but sexual impropriety is a reason for divorce. Let's turn to 1 Corinthians 7. I want to show you what the Bible says again about divorce. Someone would say, Dave, are you recommending divorce? No, I'm not recommending divorce at all. I'm recommending you stay married for life. Someone would say, well, Dave, do you honor people who get in situations where they have to get divorced? I will support people who get in situations where they have to get divorced. One thing I'll mention, too, that's really nice about our congregation that is not true about many churches of God. We do not have a doctrinal committee. Some churches have a doctrinal committee that if you get a divorce, you have to do paperwork to send to the doctrinal committee, and they will tell you if you're free to remarry or not free to remarry. That's true in many church organizations. We don't have such a thing. So someone says, Dave, well, if you're involved in something like that in the congregation, how does the congregation determine if someone's free to remarry? Do you arbitrarily do it? No, I do not. Do we have a doctrinal committee? Does the board do it? No, at this point, the board has chosen not to do that at all. What happens is we put it back on the shoulders of the individual. Now, someone say, wow, if you put it on the shoulders of the individual, all sorts of chaos will happen. Because if it's back on the shoulders of the individual, they'll all do what they want to do. Brethren, that's not my experience at all. My experience it is when you put the responsibility back on the shoulder of the people, guess what happens? They take it seriously. Because if someone says deep down, I don't know if I should get remarried, but a committee said I could, that's not an excuse. If someone says, I don't know if I can get remarried, but Dave Havir and Ron Avey and Kemmer Fun say I can. Well, what do you know deep down in your heart? What do you know deep down in your relationship with God? I have found in my experience, when I have explained to people that's on there, and I read the scriptures to them, and of course they ask me for my advice, and I'm happy to give my advice. And when I give my advice, you know what question they should ask? What scriptures, Dave, do you use to give that advice? And I give my scriptures why I give that advice. But I put it back on their shoulders. They can't blame me. They can't come up in a judgment and say, I did this because Dave Havir said. Christ would say, who's Dave Havir? Why are we worrying about what he says? How about what I said? How about what my word said? And so I have found not to have people going out and doing their own thing. I have found people take it sincerely when they realize they're standing before the great God of the universe. They don't have to worry about a committee. They're talking about the great God of the universe. Well, here in the Bible it says, 1 Corinthians 7, 3 different things, audiences to marriage. And I talked about this a little bit in the interactive study, and I really can't spend a lot of time on it, and I don't know that I did a good job explaining it, because it seems like I don't really get through like I want to get through. I find it so amazing in the Bible here, when it talks about, in the canon, there's some opinions. There are opinions being listed in the Bible. Paul's opinions are listed in the Bible, now the Bible that is canonized for us. I love it. I love that we have that. The Bible's so real. Paul is so real to me. It's not just some just cold edifice, not some cold experience. He's giving his opinion. He says in verse 6, he talks to the first group of people, what I'm about to say is a concession, not a commandment. I will warn you again, brethren. Be leery of anyone who speaks dogmatically, saying they speak for God. Please be careful of them. You say, but most preachers I know do that. Be careful of them. Every one of us is giving our interpretation. We hope our interpretations are right. Paul said, my interpretation is, I think it's best that you all be single. Now we can understand why he gave that interpretation. He thought the end time was in his life, and there could be other factors involved, so he wanted people to be single. I don't agree with that opinion, friends. I don't agree with that opinion. I think it's great to be married. Now, if you are single, that's okay, but I'm not recommending like Paul was recommending it. But he said this is a concession, not a commandment. He's specifying the difference. Now, in verse 10, when he talks to the second group of people, notice his wording. Now to the married, I command, not me, but the Lord commands. So he's basically saying in verse 10, the second group of people, he says, I'm explaining the commandment of God here. So it's still his opinion how he's promoting the commandment of God there, but he's saying is, take stronger note of this. This isn't just Paul speaking about it. This is what the Lord says. Of course, he says a wife is not to depart from a husband. If she departs, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled, and the husband is not to divorce his wife. Now, the third group, what's he going to do with the third group? Is he going to give his opinion, or is he going to give what the Lord commands? What do you think? His opinion or what the Lord commands? Let's read it. Verse 12. But to the rest, I, not the Lord, say. Did you catch the difference? The difference on the earlier one, it was what the Lord said. This one's saying, I'm telling you this, folks. I'm giving you my interpretation, Paul said. His interpretation became part of the Scripture. But anytime you hear a presentation with this one today and everyone I give and everyone else gives, you're hearing their opinion. You're hearing their interpretation. They're using Scripture to give their interpretation. But listen for that. Don't put too much stock. Don't think like, oh, no, every word is spoken from God. Now, especially those guys who say every one of their words is spoken from God. Be wary of them. They're either ignorant or presumptuous. But anyway, he says, to the rest, I speak, not the Lord speaks. If a brother has a wife who does not believe and she's willing to live with him, let him not divorce her. And if a woman has a husband who does not believe and he's willing to live with her, let him not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. So again, we see, I want to give you quick things there. There are a couple situations, and the English King James says, pleased to dwell with. And let me just tell you an example. A long time ago, there was a man who was really rude to his wife. He mistreated her. He didn't listen to her. He didn't spend time with her. But he told me flat out, I'm pleased to dwell with her, because he knew what these English words were. You know why he was pleased to dwell with her? She was a great cook. She was great at washing clothes, so she was a good servant. She was polite. He wasn't about to lose a good thing. So he was rude to her. He broke the covenant in many ways, but he knew the game. He said, I know the English word says, Mr. Havir, I'm pleased to dwell with her. No, you don't act pleased to dwell with her. Let me tell you this, it's not by saying those words. Are you acting pleased to dwell with her? Are you treating her right? Oh, I'm pleased to dwell with her. See, that's a game people play. So there are times, again, you preach the rule and you counsel the exception. There are times by people's actions. The first reason was for sexual immorality. And that's very plain. But there can be other situations that come up where a person is free to move on. Not commonplace, not an avalanche of that type of behavior, not a flood of that kind of behavior, But again, you're not going to throw stones at someone who has a legitimate situation and they move on. Now, I want to talk now about how a couple should have agreement about certain things. Look at Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5. You know what Ephesians 5 is, I believe you do. Verse 22, wives, submit to your husbands. Verse 25, husbands, love your wives. Now, I want to tell you something I believe to the bottom of my being that I hope you agree with, I hope you'll consider. And I want you to know this when you're helping people who are going into marriage. We all do not have to feel the same way about Ephesians 5. And anyone who thinks we all do, that's just not realistic. But it's important, in my opinion, it's important for a husband and wife to feel the same way. In other words, I don't have to feel the exact way about Ephesians 5 that Ron and Linda Avey feel about Ephesians 5. But Ron and Linda Avey should feel the same way about Ephesians 5. I don't have to have the same input about Ephesians 5 as Neil and Martha MacGyver feel about Ephesians 5. But Neil and Martha better feel the same way about it. My blessing is Pam and I feel the same way about Ephesians 5. So even if as a couple we feel differently than you do, what matters is Pam and I feel the same. You want the sad part of marriage? Realistically, the sad part about marriage? When you've been married 44 years or 60 years, or however long you've been married, you change. Some of your friends you know, and you're not asking any names or anything, but I'm just being honest in the real world, some of your friends you know felt the same way about Ephesians 5 when they got married, when they were 22, 25, or 27. And through life's experiences, they've changed. And they not always change at the same level, the same way. So the sad part is when you're helping young people get married and you ask them if they are united in their view of Ephesians 5, they may honestly at age 24 say, yes, we are united in how we look at that. But it's possible when they're 45, they may actually have grown apart in how they look at it. And then someone can say, well, that's kind of unfair, isn't it? Well, it's very challenging. It's very sad if people morph through life's experiences and their view of Hebrews 5 grows farther apart. When I was over at Ambassador College, there was a certain model that was true back in the early 1970s and was true at the college. Husbands were more dominant back then, and the wife was more meek back then. That's the way it was taught in society. That's the way it was taught in the Church of God. However, I had a situation come up, and this is going to sound ethnic a little bit, but I came away from Ambassador College, and I was not going to force people to live that exact model. Wasn't going to do it. The ethnic part is, I grew up around a lot of Italians up in Pennsylvania. And so I know when you make a general statement, people can draw whatever conclusions they want, but I think this is a positive statement. So when I make this general statement, I'm going to make it as a positive statement. I was not going to force marriages into that model of what people viewed Ephesians 5. I saw these Italian families. Let me tell you the way it worked back when I was growing up. You know who ran the house? Mama ran the house. But when Papa put his foot down, they did whatever Papa said. Because Papa was like, let her run that fact. She can do all that dirty work. I can go out and make a living, and I can go out and do other things, and maybe even do some sports or whatever. So when I grew up around people up in the Northeast, it was like Mama ran the house. But when Papa put his foot down, Papa was in charge. So I wasn't going to try to force these couples, these people, into relationships just because this was a model people perceived of Ephesians 5. I'm telling you, friends, it's important when people come together that they need to have the same view or a similar view of Ephesians 5. They don't have to have your view. They don't have to have my view. They don't have to have the most common view, but they have to be in agreement. Because if these two people don't agree, then that's where they're fighting. That's when they're embarrassing each other. They make a public display of them, a spectacle of themselves. Do they have the same view of Ephesians 5? If they truly have the same view of Ephesians 5, let them be. Let them work their house the way they want to work their house. As I said, the sad part is 20 years down the road, sometimes people change and they don't change together. And that is sad. I mean, that is real. That is a cross some families in the Church of God have to face, where they now have a difference in how they're going to spend the rest of their life working through that difference. Let me show you something else. Look at 1 Corinthians 14. 1 Corinthians 14, verses 34 and 35. Let your women keep silent in the churches, for they are not permitted to speak, for they are to be submissive, as the law also says. If they want to learn something, let them ask their own husbands at home. I want to say the same thing about this verse as I said about Ephesians 5. We all do not have to view that verse the same way. And we don't. We have a variety of the way people look at women's rights and women's opportunities. But I am telling you, reminding you, it's important that the husband and wife have a similar view on that. Because if they go into that relationship without the similar view, they're going to have a lot of friction that's going to be unnecessary and probably hurtful and harmful. You know, there's a wide variety of belief here about women's role. Just for the record, just so you know, open disclosure, I as your pastor believe that women can have a greater opportunity even in the Church of God. However, why do something that's going to cause offense and troublesome in the congregation? So thereby, it does affect us at how we work in the congregation. But in your marriage, hopefully you don't have to have the same view as the person sitting beside you or the same family sitting beside you. But please, if you're trying to help young people get together, hopefully they have a similar view of what that means about women keeping silent in the church. Was it an edict from God throughout all eternity? Was it a cultural thing? The matter is, when you get married, I hope the husband and wife have the similar view on that for their own happiness and peace of mind. The same thing can be said about 1 Timothy 2, verses 11 through 15. It's the same principle about learning in silence. I repeat again, it's important for the man and wife to have the similar view, a compatible view, complementary view about that, even if we as couples have slight differences along the way. The last concept I want to mention is, just as I said couples should be in agreement about the role of husbands and wives, couples should be in agreement about the role of intimacy in a relationship. Look at Hebrews chapter 13, verse 4. Couples should have the same agreement about intimacy, romance in a relationship. I remember years ago when a lot of times people expected the pastor to get explicit about what is acceptable, what is not acceptable in the privacy of someone's bedroom. And thankfully I was never had to get involved in that, and I never want to get involved in that. That has to be an agreement by the husband and wife what they do as far as how they express their love toward each other. Hebrews 13:4 says, marriage is honorable among all, and the bed undefiled, but fornicators and adulterers God will judge. So obviously Hebrews chapter 13, verse 4 shows that a marriage can go beyond thinking what they think's right, God may not be happy with. See, God may judge behavior that's behind closed doors. He may judge it in a way that's not good. But he also says there's choices being made behind closed doors that's the couple's choice to make. And again, maybe you might do something differently than your friend over here or this couple over there, and you may not even talk about it, quite frankly. But the point is, it's important, as I'm saying today, it's important that the husband and wife can be on the same page. You know, I've recommended this book before called Boundaries. And I recommend it again. To me, it's probably my favorite book in all the world besides the Bible. It's a basic book about boundaries, that if people understand boundaries in life, it would help all relationships. And sometimes people think boundaries means it sets up perimeters about don't go there. Well, actually, I think it's setting up parameters how people can communicate and work together. Do you remember what I said the number one boundary is? I've said it a couple times. The number one boundary is skin. The number one boundary is skin. You determine who touches you. And that's the same thing for a couple. When they get together, They start now sharing skin. They start sharing touch. And they determine that. By the way, I know people can make the mistake of both making bad choices. In other words, a man and a woman at work who are not married, they can make a bad choice of getting together romantically in adultery that God would not like, that their boss would not like. That can happen. But if everyone values skin, you no longer have sexual assault. You no longer have rape. If people would do the first thing of skin, you determine who touches you, and that people can mutually sin together. They can mutually join and do something together. I'm not saying they should, but they can. But if people would follow that first thing of skin, it would change a lot of things in the world. It would certainly be something that God would want in marriage in the bedroom. He would say, they choose how they touch each other. They choose how they show love to each other. One final scripture, 1 Corinthians 7, verse 5. Under the same topic about agreement, you should have agreement in the role of intimacy. Notice 1 Corinthians 7:5 talks about not only spiritual relationship, but physical relationship. And you as a couple determine how your physical and spiritual relationships work together. 1 Corinthians 7:5, do not deprive one another of romance, except there's a consent, agreement, discussion, communication, understanding, consent for a time, not a weapon, but there's a plan, there's a reason, there's a purpose why. Spiritual needs trump physical needs. And one of the spiritual purposes is that you concentrate on fasting and prayer, but you come back together because of the way God made the relationship to be. Again, you may differ, you as a couple may differ from this family as a couple, may differ from that family as a couple, may differ from that family as a couple, but I'm telling you, as you help yourself and as you help others, the more a man and woman can be in agreement about these things, it's like gravity. The happier they will be, the more blessed they will be. So again, I had a few minutes to talk with you. I appreciate your prayers for Pam and I. She's been a wonderful gal. She's a wonderful lady. Keep praying for her. I know she's got to deal with me all these years and has many more years to come, hopefully. But I wanted to share some thoughts with you. I wanted to share some thoughts from marriage in the New Testament.